The dining room was a preserved fossil, a perfect diorama of a life I'd outgrown. The same heavy chairs threatened to swallow you whole, the same oak table gleamed like a casket under the soft light, and the same soulful jazz oozed from the corner speaker, a soundtrack for a play that had been running too long. Mom's roasted squash sat steaming in its familiar dish. Dad, his surgeon's hands moving with methodical grace, carved the turkey as if it were a clinical procedure. For one fragile, breathless moment, the illusion held. I almost believed in the fantasy of our normal family. Then he passed me the bowl of mashed potatoes. His eyes met mine, and a placid, paternal smile touched his lips. So, is 2,000 a month enough? My fork clattered against the china, a sharp, discordant note that killed the jazz. I stared, uncomprehending. What money? The silence that fell was thick and heavy, smothering the music. Dad's smile dissolved. His gaze cut across the table to Mom, who suddenly found the pattern on the tablecloth fascinating. I don't understand, I whispered, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I haven't received a single transfer. The voice was my father's, but the tone clipped, cold, laced with a warning, was all Karen. He dabbed his lips with a napkin, a precise, deliberate motion, and set it aside. We thought you were using it more wisely, he repeated, the volume rising, filling the quiet room. You said you were doing translation work. Yes, my mother murmured, her voice small. For whom? The question was a crack of thunder, his voice trembling with a contained storm. Because it certainly wasn't for Susan. Mom reached for her water glass, the ice cubes chattering a frantic rhythm against her trembling hand. Betty's program is more expensive. She needs it more. You know how hard it is to break into the fashion industry. It's a brutal fight. And Susan. John's voice boomed, cutting her off. Is Susan just supposed to survive on scraps while our other daughter parades around in designer wear? He leaned forward, his focus a laser. No. I need to know. How long? A defeated sigh. Since August. His head swiveled back to me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. Susan. You had nothing? No work, no help at all. I could only shake my head, the memory bitter on my tongue. One time I asked. Mom said, there's nothing left after tuition. My father's frame seemed to deflate, the starch going out of his posture. I thought you were doing fine. A hollow laugh escaped me. I told you I was working nights. Giving private lessons, pulling shifts at the bar, skipping meals. I met his gaze, letting him see the truth he'd chosen to ignore. But, of course, everything was fine. My mother's chair screeched against the floor as she stood. Please, don't do this. Not today. It's Thanksgiving. My father didn't move. He just looked at me, and for the first time in years, he was truly seeing me, the exhaustion, the desperation, the ghost at his feast. I need some air. I pushed back from the table and walked away, the perfectly composed hallway feeling like a trap. Outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I fumbled with my jacket, clutching the thin fabric in my fists, and tried to remember how to breathe. The fall semester wasn't a schedule, it was a siege. My days were a brutal relay race, the formaldehyde sting of the anatomy lab at dawn, the frantic scribbling of tutoring sessions in the afternoon, the sticky floor exhaustion of the bar until past midnight. I sold my hours in fragments, telling myself the same lie on a loop. It was temporary. Just until I caught up. Just until the rent was paid. Just until I could afford to take a full, unpanicked breath. My body ran on a deficit. Breakfast was a ghost. Lunch was a transaction, a chalky protein bar and bitter coffee gulped between lectures. Dinner was a concession, the styrofoam shock of instant noodles or the stale, salvaged pastries I'd collect from the cafe dumpster, my cheeks burning with a shame I couldn't afford to feel. The soles of my boots finally gave up, flapping open like a desperate mouth. I stapled them back together in the bar's grimy backroom. The metal prongs a temporary suture holding my entire crumbling world together. Then, my body called the lie. I remember the tray of drinks, heavy and slick in my hands. A customer snapping his fingers, a blur of impatience in the dim light. Then a wave of heat, a sudden void opening up beneath my feet. I woke to the sterile, blinding white of a hospital ceiling, the rhythmic beep of a monitor keeping time with my pulse, and the cold pinch of an 4 in my arm. A nurse with kind, tired eyes asked if there was someone she should call. No, I whispered, the word tasting like dust. Later, my manager told me he'd been the one to call the ambulance. He dialed my parents, too. No one answered, he said, his voice a mix of pity and confusion. I left a message. I thought for sure they'd come. The silence from them was louder than any siren. 2 days later, a knock. It was Donald, my lab partner, standing in my doorway with a grocery bag in one hand and a Tupperware container in the other. I never gave him my address. He'd pieced it together, a quiet detective of my despair. You look like you're disappearing, he said, his voice soft as he set the food on the counter. I was curled on the edge of my bed, drowning in an old sweatshirt, the hood pulled low to hide my face. I'm fine, I mumbled, the most transparent lie I'd ever told. He didn't argue. He just pressed a warm plate of baked ziti into my hands and sat in silence across from me. I took a bite. The flavors, rich tomato, creamy cheese, real sustenance, exploded on my tongue, a shocking contrast to the nothingness I'd been consuming. I had to clench my jaw, fighting back a torrent of tears over a single forkful of pasta. That night, for the first time in a year, I slept for 12 hours straight. Not a frantic collapse, but a deep, healing plunge into nothingness. The next morning, the light from my phone screen felt accusatory. 2 messages from Mom. The first, glad you're okay. Can you ask Betty for the name of that skincare brand you liked? A typo or a Freudian slip, she'd written Betty instead of me, as if my existence was merely a conduit for my sisters. The second, don't forget to eat. The hollow concern was a fresh wound. I deleted them both, the act feeling like brushing a cobweb from a tombstone. Days later, the algorithm, that cruel and faithful curator, served me a video of Betty. There she was, bathed in the perfect, filtered sunlight of a West Hollywood cafe, smiling over a plate of artfully arranged avocado toast. The caption read, "The best way to start the day." Thanks, Mom. I stared until the pixels blurred, then opened my banking app. A thin crack ran across the screen, distorting the dismal numbers, a fitting fracture in my reality. I kept scrolling through her feed, a moth drawn to the flame of its own destruction. A new carousel appeared. Rooftop bar. Velvet chairs, cocktails shimmering in gold-rimmed glasses. And Betty, in a cream silk Dior dress, her hair sculpted into a high bun that had likely cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The caption was a masterclass in casual cruelty. Mom always knows what I need. Life is brunch. A cold numbness spread through me. I locked the phone, placed it face down on the floor as if to contain a contagion, and lay back on the bare mattress. My eyes traced the water-stained patterns on the ceiling, the peeling paint a map of my own decay. In the corner, the mini-fridge groaned its familiar, struggling hum. I couldn't remember the last time I'd bought a vegetable that wasn't canned. The memory surfaced, sharp and precise. A month ago, I'd sent a carefully worded email, a plea for help buying a new anatomy atlas. My old one was literally disintegrating, its pages warped and stained from a spilled mug during a late-night study session. Her reply was swift and sterile. "That's a luxury, Susan. You'll manage." That very same week, Betty had posted a glowing tribute to a new pair of Balenciaga boots. Thank you to my incredible mom for always believing in my dreams. I could still hear my mother's voice in that reply, not angry, but dismissive. Light. Chirpy. And the most devastating part was that I felt no burning anger. That fire had guttered out, leaving only a vast, silent devastation. The part of me that had ever tried to rationalize her favoritism, to find some twisted logic in it, had finally gone quiet. I had never asked to be spoiled. I just wanted to stop begging for the bare minimum. I scrolled through my contacts, a digital graveyard of neglected relationships, until I found her name. I hadn't dialed it in months. Our conversations were a graveyard of my unanswered texts. I took a breath that felt like shards of glass and pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Susan? You never call. Is everything okay? Her voice was a melody of effortless ease. Yes, I lied, the word ash in my mouth. Just wanted to see how you were. It's been a while. She laughed. Miss me already? Of course, I whispered, the sound swallowed by the room. She launched into a breathless monologue, a fashion shoot in Pasadena, a stylist's crisis over almond milk. I made noncommittal noises, my eyes fixed on the stack of bills on my table. When I could bear it no longer, I cut in. Betty, how are you managing all this? LA is a lot. Oh, she chirped, and I could picture her casual shrug. Mom sends $3,500 a month. Sometimes more for big events. The number hung in the air, a physical weight. $3,500. My rent was $850. My world, my desperate calculus of staples and protein bars, tilted off its axis. That's great, I forced out, my throat tight. Yeah, she sighed, already moving on. She just gets it. She says it's an investment in the dream. A beat. So, how's school with you? The rest was static. I nodded at the phone, muttering and sounds cool, a perfect automaton of a sister. When the call ended, the silence was deafening. My face was hot with a shame that wasn't mine to carry. I caught my reflection in the dark window, a pale, frayed ghost, something essential inside me having come completely unmoored. With a cold, clear certainty, I opened a new browser tab. I searched for flights. The cheapest one was a nightmare of layovers and a 6-hour delay, but it would land me in Chicago just in time for Thanksgiving dinner. I didn't hesitate. I clicked book. I closed the laptop, swept the unpaid bills into a drawer, and pulled my worn suitcase from the closet. I didn't know what I would say when I faced them. I didn't have a plan. But I knew the silence was over. The kitchen table felt like a relic from a different life. Sunlight, the same that had once illuminated my gold star spelling tests taped to the window, now felt accusatory. The meal was a quiet, tense affair. Mom had made lentil soup and chicken salad. It was simple, but it was more real food than I'd seen in weeks. I forced down a few bites before my fork felt too heavy to lift. My father's gaze was a physical weight. You've lost weight, he said, his voice low. I offered a shallow shrug. Are you all right? Define all right. Susan. A warning, laced with concern. I'm fine. He leaned forward, his surgeon's eyes missing nothing. What does fine usually eat for dinner? The discount rack. Instant noodles. Whatever's left on the plates at the bar when the manager takes pity. The silence that followed was different from the one at Thanksgiving. This was quieter, more dangerous. The 2000, he began, his voice dangerously soft. It wasn't enough? I looked right at him. And I saw it then, not malice, but genuine, bewildered ignorance. Dad, I said, my voice eerily calm. There was no 2000. Not a single dollar. His fork hit the porcelain with a sharp, startling crack. He turned to my mother. Karen. She wouldn't meet his gaze, her eyes locked on her untouched soup. I was sending it to Betty, she said, her voice flat. My father was speechless. She's in the fashion industry, John, Mom continued, a defensive edge creeping in. It's a different world. The networking, the events, she has to look the part. I felt a hollow laugh bubble in my chest. And I said, my voice trembling, don't have to eat? Mom's eyes snapped to me, and for a fleeting second, I saw pure, unadulterated fear. It's not that you don't need help, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's that you've always been the strong one. You manage. Betty, she's more fragile. She needs the support. My father rose slowly from his chair. You looked me in the eye and told me you were sending that money to Susan. You let me believe my daughter was safe. She is safe. Mom's voice rose, sharp with desperation. She always is. His gaze swung back to me, and the shock had now crystallized into a dawning, gut-wrenching guilt. I pushed my chair back and walked away, her voice fading behind me. He knocked that night. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice ragged. "It's all rearranging itself in my head." He sat on the edge of my old bed. "Remember when we bought Betty her car? You said, 'I'll get one, maybe next year.' Your mother said you didn't mind." "I didn't mind," I whispered. "That medical camp. The summer before your senior year. She said you changed your mind, decided to work instead." I cried for a week when she told me we couldn't afford it. That same summer, he said, the words ash in his mouth, "Betty went to Italy." He turned away. I should have asked. God, I should have asked. But she made it so easy. So seamless. He was quiet for a long moment. "She always said you were independent. That you'd find a way." "She wasn't wrong," I said. "I did find a way. I just shouldn't have had to." His jaw tightened. "This was never about strength, Susan. It was about fairness." He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a profound, weary grief. "And I missed you. I missed you for years." The next morning, I found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements. "Susan," he began, his voice gravelly. "I need you to understand. I didn't just take her word for it. I gave her the access." "To what?" "To the trust," he said, the words quiet and heavy. "Your grandfather's trust. For you and Betty. It was always meant to be split equally." He shook his head. "She was authorized to manage it for your education and welfare. She's been systematically transferring funds into a separate account. Only in Betty's name." He rubbed his temples. $250,000. So far. The number didn't shock me. It was too vast. Instead, it landed with a dull, final thud, a confirmation of the scale of the lie. "What now?" "I've already spoken with a lawyer. We'll begin the process of recovering what we can. It will be complicated. It will take time." I just nodded. Betty called 2 days later. "Mom says my allowance is being cut to $1,000 a month. Is this your doing?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "Dad is handling the finances now." She exhaled, a dramatic, frustrated sound. "I can't live on that, Susan. My rent alone is triple that." "I know," I said. A loaded silence stretched. "Do you really think this is fair?" she finally asked, her voice dripping with affronted privilege. I thought of hospital bills and stapled boots, of cracked phone screens and a silence that cost $250,000. "I think it's a beginning," I said. The dial tone was her only reply. I saw her that night. A silhouette in the study, sliding cash into a plain envelope. Later, my father found it. He didn't shout. "I can't do this anymore, Karen." I was trying to protect her. "And who," he asked, his voice hollow, was protecting Susan. "Susan is fine," she insisted. "She always manages." He looked more tired than I'd ever seen him. "You use her strength as an excuse to neglect her." He shook his head. And what, in all of this, was for Susan? Her silence was the only answer. The paperwork for a legal separation was filed by the week's end. Back in Philadelphia, my life began to recalibrate. I dropped 2 bar shifts. I kept tutoring. The rest of the time I studied, I slept, I ate real food. My grades climbed. I bought a new pair of sneakers. It felt like a repair, paid for twice over, once with the money and once with the truth. Then Betty called, her voice softer. "I think I'm starting to get it," she said. "What all of this really cost." A long, honest pause. I didn't want to see it. Because if I saw it, I'd have to admit that every time Mom made things easier for me, she was actively making them harder for you. "I don't need your guilt, Betty. I just need you to stop pretending it was fair." "I won't," she whispered. "Are you going home for the holidays?" "Not sure." "Dad is." "Me too," she said. "Maybe we could go together?" I didn't say yes. But for the first time, I didn't say no. A year has bled away since that Thanksgiving dinner. My life has found a rhythm, steady and predictable. I sleep through the night. I eat meals that nourish. I study without one eye on the clock. Betty is still in LA, but the girl who curated a life of brunch and velvet ropes is gone. She works part-time at a boutique, her voice animated as she explains the craft of it, not just the label. Mom works at a home goods store now. Our calls are brief, cordial. The distance feels permanent. Dad calls every Sunday. He listens, really listens, as if he's making up for a lifetime. One evening, Betty called. "I'm thinking of going to Mom's for the holidays. Do you want to go together?" Not to pretend. Just to see if we can do it differently this time. A long silence stretched, but it was a patient one. "Okay," I said. "Let's go." Christmas arrived without ceremony. We stood on the familiar porch. Mom opened the door. She wore a sweater I didn't recognize, her hair threaded with more silver. We sat around the same polished oak table where our family had shattered. The meal was simple. It was enough. No one exhumed the past, but its presence was acknowledged in our careful politeness. It wasn't warmth, but it was honesty. Later, unpacking in my old room, I took a plain white envelope from my bag, this semester's tuition receipt, and placed it in the bedside drawer. It settled beside a folded note from Dad. I unfolded it. "This is yours," it read. "Not because you earned it, but because I finally saw you." I traced the words with my finger, then closed the drawer. For so long, I was taught that love was a currency, that silence was a fortress, and that strength was a performance of needing no one. I don't believe that anymore. Now I know that true strength is the courage to be seen, in all your ragged imperfection, and that to be seen is the most profound form of love. Our story didn't end with a neat, perfect healing. It simply began with one. And for now, that beginning is enough.